Welcome to another episode of A Pint of Scotch, where the whiskey is aged, the beer is fresh, and the ideas are cutting edge. I'm Gautam Palapa, and I'll be the moderator for today's episode. As always, I am joined by two industry experts, executive leaders, and my really good friends, Brian Ross and JT Perry. Welcome, fellas.
Thank you. Thank you. Happy to be here.
All right. So today's topic is a good one and something that I'm sure all of us can relate to because it's summer in the northern hemisphere, which means kids are at home, it's hot, and we need to take a vacation just for our sanities. So, today I want us to talk about taking time off and preventing burnout. But I don't want to limit ourselves to vacations, but I want to talk more about the everyday and the seasonal breaks that prevent us from hitting that wall. And specifically, I want us to explore why taking time off isn't a luxury, it's a survival skill. So let me set the stage. Half of Americans are going to skip taking their vacation days this year, despite having fewer days off than almost anywhere in the world. So, as a contrast, for example, in Austria, people are guaranteed over 40 days off annually. That's amazing. And here instead, we wear burnout like a badge of honor until it breaks us. So, too many people are skipping taking vacations. And sometimes it's out of guilt. Sometimes it's because the culture quietly discourages it. And sometimes it's because busy feels like that badge of honor that I talked about. And the cost of this is rising burnout, reduced performance, and let's be honest, bad business outcomes. So, today I want us to dig in from three different angles. The first one is the seasonality portion of things. So, how to handle summer holiday coverage without burning people out. The next one is detection. Like, how are we going to have early detection of the signs of burnout from both an employee and from a manager perspective? And then afterwards, how are we going to make the good things systemic? How enterprises can make time off prevention part of the operating model instead of guilty indulgence. So let's start with the first one. That's the seasonality. And I have some statistics here and I want to refer to them so that I quote them properly. According to Expedia's 20 annual vacation deprivation report, which came out in June of 2024, 53% of Americans don't plan to use any of their allocated vacation days, despite receiving on an average just 12 days annually. That's the fewest that any country has reported of the countries that were surveyed. 12 days. And then vacation deprivation, which is the feeling of not having enough time off, is at 11% high, according to them, of 65%. And 65% of the Americans have reported that they have a vacation deprivation, and it's likely to go up. And compared to the global average, the US is 32% versus 18% across the rest of the world. And contrast that with Europe. Nearly 30% of Europeans take more than 25 vacation days, while only 6% of Americans are managing this. So it is a big problem. And even more telling is that 59% of the Europeans, they take more than 21 days of vacation compared to just 51% of Americans taking 10 days or less. So it's not just a systemic problem, it's not just a leadership problem, it's personal too. And so we've had all these seasons where we're trying to be present at home and trying to keep our work commitments from spiraling. So I figured we'd start off here. And Brian, you've led teams through this and you've also lived through this yourself. How have you handled this kind of seasonal crunch, both as a manager, making sure that the team is covered, and also personally as an individual, protecting your own time and energy?
Yeah, sure. So I think first and foremost, you've highlighted the big thing, which is a large part of this is cultural within an organization and lot to do with regions as well. I've had the benefit of leading teams here in the UK, but also across in Europe. And more recently, I've been working with US teams, and I've certainly noticed a big difference in how we all approach PTO. From a manager perspective, I would say the biggest element for that seasonal crunch is just good planning. You should be aware that during certain times of the year, you're going to have more of your team available than others. And that's an important part. So, and it should be relatively easy to plan that work. We know that generally speaking, it's going to be summer holidays, it's going to be Christmas, it's going to be things like that. And as a manager, I think you've got a responsibility to ensure that your team are taking their holidays and are distributing that kind of evenly throughout the year so they don't suffer that burnout. And maybe the important thing there as a manager is that it's not just about setting the expectations for team members that it's okay to take holidays, even though we're busy. It's to manage expectations from the incoming projects, from support and everything else. And as a business, if we're all taking holidays and we're all doing the right thing to avoid burnout, then that should be okay. That being said, there are a few teams that I've seen that have really struggled to reduce their headcounts. And that's usually because they've got some form of key person dependencies. So for me, I've always stood by that the best thing you can do in any team, like the one thing you can do for all of your teammates above all your other work, is documentation and automation. And to give you an example of this, I remember many, many moons ago where I was kind of doing management for the first time. A lot of my team were on leave, and lo and behold, everything came to a grinding halt. And I logged in remotely over VPN, checked the documentation. Lo and behold, somebody had written a troubleshooting document. So I searched for the error message that appeared in the logs, found the troubleshooting doc, followed the guide, including some automation that was there to make it easier. And I was able to bring the service back up and running, even though I had no real expertise in that thing. And that's really the power of documentation and kind of planning for people not to be there. And I think that's really important. In terms of horror stories, I think Christmas is probably the hardest time, right? Because it's not just individuals going on holiday over summer. Everybody wants the exact same time off. And for certain industries like retail or media, like I've worked in, Christmas is one of the busiest times for the business in terms of revenue. So that's when all hands are to the pump. So it's a really difficult time to try and establish a fair support rota, across your teams. And it's not always easy. I think the thing that's missing, though, and the one that I learned the hard way, is that managers are generally unofficially on call throughout that period. So I've unfortunately been that father who's had to leave the dinner table and go and deal with some calls and try and protect the team as they try and fix issues, and I try and communicate what we're doing about it, etc. So, look, I think there's a lot of trouble that comes with trying to manage teams and the seasonality of work, but it's certainly possible. And I would say that they're not special. These are just generally good practices around ensuring that you can continue to do business if you lose someone due to holiday, sickness, or maybe they've moved on to another role, right?
Yeah, that's true. JT, any additional things? You're good and you're bad and you're honor?
Brian is, really hit on a lot of it, right? I used to think of it as almost like and right at the end you hit it. We practice all this disaster recovery and backup and restore. How do you practice for 3 of your people had to be out next week? You didn't plan it. They didn't plan it. That thing, how are you going to keep the lights on? Being a part of the employee benefits business, whether disability insurance or health insurance, January 1st was our Super Bowl, whatever, insert American metaphor here. And so, that put the crunch right over the holidays. How as an industry, we never figured out how to move that. I don't know. But that does bring in the same challenge, and that was right, even hiring, like a lot of conversation. What I found as especially a senior leader was holding my middle managers accountable, both good and bad, right? I personally believe incentives, right? If however you incent your middle manager, that is going to be what they pursue. They're not lemmings, they're incredibly smart people. But if you say, here are the 4 or 5 things I'm going to measure you by, well, what are the 4 or 5 things they're going to really make sure they highlight? And so, I used to find that putting in, hey, I have an expectation that your people will use, right, overall X%, sometimes you're just trying to ladder it up, but 90% of your thing, that's going to look good on your employee review or your bonus or your gold sticker for the week, whatever the case may be from that perspective. And this is a place where my military background came in, right? 30 days a year as part of a submarine crew, right? Only 110 people or so. And we were gone, 6, 7 months of the year. So that obviously narrows all of that optional time off. And yet we all largely got it. So I kind of always used to go, look, I hate to be that guy, but if as a submarine we could get 100 people 30 days off when there's really only 4 or 5 months to choose from that, I'm pretty sure as an insurance company we can figure it out too. And then to Brian's point about key man, right? If there is that person, right, that a manager or even on my own team felt like they could never leave, that's my problem, right? That or that manager's problem. They've got to solve that. And if that person won't give up that, right, because they want to be the hero, well, that's just a separate conversation, not necessarily about the PTO itself, right? That's a symptom, not the disease kind of thing. And the other thing I would just say from where I've seen it's good, I have seen, unlimited PTO is a double-edged sword, right? I think it's, you can have all the time off you want and we're not going to track it. Well, that means as a manager, you still better be keeping an eye on people taking PTO or not. It also has this horrible secondary benefit. If you ever leave, you don't get paid out for it either, which I think is the big secret of corporations and why they do it. It removes it from the financial books. But if you are going to do that, right, it's like everything else. It's a tool. It's not all bad. You have to put a mandatory minimum in there, right? You have unlimited PTO, but you have to take 20, 30 days a year. That's the only way I've seen it be viable, in my opinion. And then I've seen it be fairly successful of that. And that shows as an employer that you're not trying to do it just for, underhanded or purposes or financial book manipulation, to be blunt about it, but by leaning into, no, you do have a minimum, that raises the expectation of it.
No, that's a great point, and I'm glad you brought up the unlimited PTO or infinite PTO that a lot of companies have been putting it in. If you don't enforce, like, or at least encourage people to take a minimum number of days, it means nothing, because there are different cultures as well, and different organizational cultures and people cultures, where taking time off could actually be a hesitation for someone. So having come from Asia, that is a big culture. Like, working to death is a badge of honor for a lot of Asians. And we see that propagate here as well. And people, they fear taking time off because that's considered as slacking. Instead, instituting like a minimum number of vacation days that someone has to take and tracking towards it is probably a good thing. And that could help with some of the burnout that we're having. But so let's go to burnout, because it's not just during vacation time, or it's not just during holiday season, and all these situations where we know it recurs on a regular basis. Burnout actually just creeps in quietly, but it creeps in month after month, or until suddenly it's not about needing a break. It's about trying to recover from being completely drained. Like, if the human body is like a battery, you just get drained out of it and you don't have enough amount of time to recharge. So this is where it gets interesting, because spotting burnout, and we touched a little bit about it, is it's not just a manager's job, right? So sure, as leaders, we need to constantly be very sensitive, and we need to notice for warning signs on our teams, but we also need to catch them in ourselves before we start running on fumes and making a bad decision. So it's not just the managerial or the organizational requirement, it is also a personal thing. So JT, if you were to look at it from both sides of the desk, what are the earliest signs you have seen that burnout is starting to set in? And maybe if you can share one time you caught it early, either in yourself or someone else you led, and one time it went too far before anyone stepped in. I think that would help emphasize the critical need for us to recognize this burnout syndrome that we all will go through.
Yeah, I think a key here is the culture you've built in your team before you even get there, right? Trying to build that culture of honesty and safe space. making sure that you've painted the picture that you aren't one of those people that, even joking, and look, I'm one of the most sarcastic humans I know, but going wow, Gotham, you're taking off again, right? Even if you mean it in joy, you can kind of create, set this tone behind the scenes of, oh boy, I shouldn't take the time off.
Mm-hmm.
But trying to create that culture where people trust each other, where they have friends at work, because that's really what, the first thing I think you see, or that I have seen in my experience, is people that were much more active are just not. They're just there, right? Maybe they were the ones that raised their hand at the meeting, or jumped in or volunteered to take on something, and they're just not. They're just quiet, right? Now, if somebody's quiet by nature, right, and they could be just as good of an employee as the one that's always volunteering, trying to see just frankly that something's different, that maybe that project that you always knew you could count on them, suddenly they're starting to miss deadlines for not necessarily really good reasons. But the reason I brought up that culture issue is I find that peers will pick it up even sooner than managers, right? People can put on a facade for their managers, even if they trust you, even if you are the best manager in the world. Maybe because they respect you, they're going to put on a little bit more of a facade and lean in a little harder. But I've found more, hey, Fred comes to me and goes, man, boy, I don't know. I can't put my finger on it, but Sally just, boy, the last couple of weeks hasn't been the same. I'm getting a little worried about her. And if you build that culture, you will generally get that, right? That's not tattletaling, that's genuine concern, right? And then making sure, right, you keep stuff confidential and that kind of thing. But those, frankly, have been the biggest scenes that I've seen. Just either the person that was really active suddenly becomes quiet. I have absolutely missed it on the quiet employee. It was really kind of the way that came up to me was a peer. But overall, most of the time I have found it to be peers, other people who are just really concerned, right? Because you've built this culture of, having friends at work, really you can start to raise a hand. I've raised hands on peers before. And if you catch it early enough, having that, sometimes it has to be a pretty hard, direct conversation to say, hey, I really care about you, but we're seeing your performance has changed. This doesn't have to be a bad thing. What can we help you to do to reset, right? Sometimes if you just open the door, right, it all comes out and you can figure it out. And it doesn't have to be something big and dramatic. I don't mean to paint that picture, but you can have that conversation and say, all right, let's come up with a plan, right? Sometimes it may be, hey, we're on Wednesday, take Thursday and Friday off. And our goal Monday is to come out and figure out how we can get you an even bigger block of time off over the next month, right? I might not be able to give you 3 weeks right this second, but I can figure it out, that we can get it to you relatively soon. But, for sure, walk away, because at some point, right, you being there is less productive than you not being there, right? And not because anybody's a bad employee or anything else, right? But we talked about it before. As Americans, we've built up this culture of the number of days that you take off is, right, a badge of honor in the negative, right, kind of thing. I only took 1 day off next week. I got to roll over all my PTO this year, right? That should be failure, not success. But where did it go too far? It was frankly me. Pandemic, although I think that had something to do with it. But, in that there wasn't a place to go. And if there wasn't a place to go, I felt weird about taking it off. And that's my own mistake, my own. People should absolutely do the staycation thing and take time off and hang around the house. That's perfectly viable. But then also some business changes that I had a really, really hard time with where the company was. And I absolutely was that person that suddenly started pulling back. And my peers would talk to me about it. Unfortunately, we had a leadership situation where they weren't going to go to the leader and I wasn't going to go to the leader. But it did end up me leaving the business. And the best of news, that's how I met you guys. But it definitely left to me just having to check all the way out, because there was no amount of time off that was, I kind of sat and stewed in what were little things and changes in the business. Became big things in my head because I was burnt out, right? I think if I wasn't burnt out and I'd taken vacation, it would have been the everybody bitches about their boss, even the good ones kind of stuff that the molehill turned into a mountain, so to speak.
Thank you for sharing, JT. That's That's really incredible, the story that you've been telling and the ways in which we can recognize and try to find out burnout. Brian, you want to add on to it and probably share a story or two of yours?
Yeah, sure. So I think that's the key, JT, right? Is you mentioned they're monitoring people's energy, their engagement, and probably their patience. I've certainly found that is much harder now that we are all mostly working remote. Back in the days of working in the office, it was much easier to get a sense around the room of how everybody was working, or the kind of non-verbal cues that they're kind of not happy as individuals. For me, I think it's important to recognize that burnout isn't just when you're done. You kind of want to catch that early. And it doesn't necessarily need to be that you are working too hard. Sometimes it can be that you're working on the wrong things. And I think for my teams, when I was starting off as a manager running platform teams, the thing that I would pay attention to was how many support tickets we had and how much tech debt we had building. Because what I've found is that teams would begin to feel burnout when they felt they were behind. And behind is a really odd word because there's no real target necessarily. But I think what it boils down to is that if they're not able to get on with the work that they personally think is important, then they feel that kind of weight on their shoulders. So my goal, my solution to this was my classic phrase of "let the world burn." Like explaining to them that sometimes support tickets or some of the non-important urgent work just needs to be put to one side so we can do things that are important. So what we'd do with that is I'd tell them, quite frankly, send any requests for new work to me and I will drop them for you so that you're not having to do we don't have time. And then likewise for any support tickets, I'll do the triage. I may not be the world's best or the most technical at that particular platform, but I can certainly try and filter out and prioritize what's really important and get enough information so we can just act immediately rather than a lot of the dross that comes through with that. And the key thing is just giving the team like a couple of weeks to feel like they're back in control, I think can be really important. And then likewise, to your point, JT, around having like the culture in the team, it was my way of demonstrating that I am looking out for them. I am, almost like in a father figure, and I'm willing to get my hands dirty. Like I'm willing to do all of the crappy work, if you like. I'll go clean the toilets while you serve the front of house, right? I'm happy to do that. And then one of the things I did as a result of that was to bring in a thing called we called Rogue Fridays. And that is where for one afternoon on a Friday, you can work on whatever is important to you. That might be you want to learn a new skill, you might want to try a new language, you might want to do something, or it might be that this one thing inside the platform isn't the way you want it to be, and you just want to spend an afternoon working on that. And I find that giving someone that autonomy to work on what's important to them, especially on a Friday as you're wrapping up for the week, is just a lovely way to get that win before you go into the weekend. It kind of gives you a nice separation between work and personal. In terms of horror stories, again, I think it's probably going to be a common theme, but yeah, I missed my own burnout. I was very busy looking after other people, but when I was becoming a new manager, I didn't really see myself burning out. What was happening is I was getting progressively busier and busier as our platform became more popular. I would end up kind of working the evenings to catch up a little bit. And then I might start working some of the weekend. That way I'm positioning myself for the week ahead to make sure I'm in a good position to start Monday. And as a result, I was just spending all of my time working and I became all things that JT mentioned. I became a bit more disconnected, a bit more irritable. I had a lot less patience. And I personally found I was just tired all the time, irrespective of how much sleep I was getting. I had to take a step back. I had to talk to some trusted peers to kind of work out how to do that. It's very difficult to change what I saw as being successful because all of these things in my head were coming from a good place. Like platform is really popular. We're doing all this work because we've done it. We've achieved what we wanted to do. And I think discovering the power of saying no is probably the biggest thing that I learned from my peers. And they help me view myself as a key person dependency, which is why I raised it earlier, because that's really what it is. As JT says, it's disaster recovery, it's business continuity. And as a manager, it's important that I should be able to disappear for a couple of weeks at a time. If I can't, then I'm a bad manager. The team should know what the priorities are. The team should be able to make decisions autonomously. And so I put a whole bunch of systems and processes in place to let me take some time away. And these days, like I go on sailing holidays every year, and that is my time where I will disconnect entirely from the world for 2 to 3 weeks at a time. No phones, no social medias, no text messages, no Slack, no emails, no nothing. And my only rule is that when I come back, I take a day or two to kind of ramp my work back up again slowly. So I don't start work. I tell everyone I'm going to be back on the Wednesday, whereas in reality I was back on the Monday. And Monday and Tuesday are just catching up on what's been happening, getting the emails under control, and all that kind of good stuff.
Those are some-
Well, just before I finish, actually, one important thing: if you are busy, take time to go outside every day for a walk. I don't care whether it's 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, or half an hour. I am, to this day, incredibly frustrated at just how successful taking a stupid walk for your dumb mental health actually is. Like, it
Yes.
really does work. So get out there, get outside.
That is great. And thank you for bringing all these up. These are some really important things that I'm sure the listeners will really appreciate. I want to add on to it. I think the common theme is even early on, I did not recognize my burnout. I learned the hard way how to manage it. I also believed that working yourself to death is a badge of pride and a badge of honor. And I was actually, one point of time early on in my career, I used to tout how long I used to work continuously without taking a single day of vacation, which in hindsight is very, very stupid. But, we were young. Those are things that we like to talk about. These are all vanity metrics at the end of the day. One thing that a mentor of mine told early is that whatever you do, whether you're participating or you're not participating, the world will still be rotating the next day. So remember that you are not that important in this world. You are a cog in the machine. You need to take time for yourself. The other thing that I really liked is your Rogue Days, Rogue Fridays, like Brian, that you brought up. We used to do something similar. We used to have like Wednesdays or Fridays off, afternoons off, so that they could work on anything that they want. One additional thing that I used to do with my teams is we used to have Family Fridays. So one Friday of the month, on a rotational basis, one of the team members or a couple of team members used to get that Friday off so that they could spend time with their family. So we used to have like a rota system, and it just allows them to spend more time with the family. We all need to have a work-life harmony, and so we used to bring that in. These are all great points. We've talked about a lot of things, but I want to go into a couple of things that I want us to go quickly into, right? I want to do it like lightning round. So, one question at a time. I'll give it to both of you. Try to limit yourselves to 1 or 2 sentences max and keep it sharp so that our listeners can take it straight to work. So, first thing up, and you guys have already talked a little bit about it, but one policy you'll implement by Monday to reduce burnout. Brian, you go first.
In a new organization, I would implement Rogue Fridays, give everyone one afternoon each week where they can work on what they think is important.
JT?
Mandatory disconnect on PTO. And I have gone as far as disabling accounts before to do that. But you have to do that as the manager to demonstrate it.
Awesome. I would delete every recurring meeting for 2 weeks during peak seasons. You'll get a lot done without the noise, and people will finally have room to breathe without sacrificing delivery. And I've done that in some organizations. All right. Next one. One leader behavior that you'll model this quarter to support healthy time off habits.
I'll jump in. It's a little bit of a copy of the last one. Actually, uninstall Slack when I leave, at least for the work account, and same with work email. Or if you're on 2 phones, leave the work email behind. If that's not okay with your business, then you've got some other questions to ask about what is PTO.
Brian?
Having just come back from vacation, I think I will be sharing the post-vacation benefits. I'm going to talk openly about how my time off helps me reset, in the hope that inspires others to recognize the importance of taking time away from the business.
Nice. For me, it's also related to Slack or communication. When I'm off, I'm off. No Slack, no midnight emails, nothing. And I believe that leaders lead by example, and fake resting while still working is not going to help anyone. And it's the fastest way to normalize burnout. Okay, last one. One leading metric that you track monthly to catch burnout early. So let me start at this time tracking after hour work spikes. That is something that I have done. I measure and I actually get account activities or system activities of people who are working after hours so that we have a conversation about why they need to work after hours and there's such a huge spike, which means it could be a systemic problem.
I'll jump in. Oh, sorry, you go.
Go ahead.
Sure. For me, it's maybe a bit basic. I would monitor PTO utilization and distribution throughout the year. I want to ensure that everyone in my team is taking enough time off, distributed well throughout the year, and I want to ensure they've got at least 1-2 week contiguous break so they can really disconnect from work and come back energized.
Nice. JT?
Really, I build on both of yours. I mean, I think Brian's, to be honest, is the first metric I'd put in. But the other one that I find tracking is, and it's a little bit of what you said, Gotham, but is emails after hours. And I try really, really hard to not do it myself. I'll even schedule an email if I absolutely have to do something in the evening. I know personal lives get in the way sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tracking who's answering and reading emails off hours is a really important one. They need to stop.
Awesome. And I'd like to add on a little bit because I spoke really fast about the systemic monitoring. This is identifying work spikes. So this is unusual behavior. If someone always likes to work at night and that is their sweet spot, that's perfectly okay. But if suddenly we are seeing work spikes and it's not the norm, I get very concerned because then I start feeling that I'm overloading people. So I just want to clarify it for some of the audience members and the listeners is we want to make sure that we are encouraging people to work at regular hours. It's not a workshop, no, a warehouse where you're working 9 to 5. You work at any time possible, but if there are unusual spikes, we need to be very concerned. All right. All right. So with that, that's a wrap for today's pour of Pint of Scotch. So we've talked about this. Burnout isn't just a systemic problem, it's also a people problem. If you keep expecting peak performance without planned recovery, you're not running a team, you're actually running them into the ground. Time off is maintenance, it's not misuse. And that's something that we all need to acknowledge. And too many leaders, unfortunately, and I'm using the leaders with the quotes in between, they still see it as lost productivity, when in reality, it's an investment in sustaining performance. And so the mindset has to shift from time away hurts of output to time away protects outcome. And I've gone much deeper in my book, Leading with Empathy. I was trying so hard not to use the word empathy in this one, but I do need to say that here. Like, there are a lot of practical tips and techniques. I've actually spent a lot of time on this, so you can take a look at those. I'll include the link in the show notes if you want to explore further. So delete a meeting, take a break, and protect your team's capacity to win the long game. Because in business, it's endurance that always beats the sprint. Thanks for joining us, and always please share your thoughts and stories with us on social media or in the comments. Remember, whether it's technology, it's empathic leadership, or the drink in your hand, it's the depth of and flavor of the journey that matters. Always take time to savor the wisdom one sip at a time. And until next time, raise your glasses high and cheers to the stories yet to be told. Thank you.